Welcome to this e-learning module on action planning. The module will introduce you to the what, why and how to develop and work with an action plan. Working with action plans is an important element of most DFC supported learning programs. The action plan allows you to make what you learn from DFC supported learning programs actionable by supporting you in applying the tools, methods and knowledge that you acquire during the program to identify solutions relevant to you and your organization. The action plan method also constitutes a project planning and implementation toolbox that can help you analyze, plan, and implement initiatives in your own organization and elsewhere. The action plan method entails both a process and an end product. The action plan process should ideally start early in the learning process, where you, in close dialogue with key stakeholders of your organization, zoom in on how your new knowledge and capabilities can benefit the organization. The action plan process can thus help you identify challenges that your organization is currently facing and how these can be met through its daily work, projects, or other initiatives. This close dialogue should continue throughout the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the action plan, and can help you clarify whether there is a need for further analysis, data collection, and so forth. The end product is the actual action plan, a living document that summarizes the analysis of the current situation and describes the desired future situation and the pathway of changes that your action plan will bring about. It also includes a description of the planned activities and the results that these activities are intended to produce. Continuous dialogue with your key stakeholders in your organization and the beneficiaries is crucial for the quality and appropriateness of the action plan. There are two main reasons why Dunedin Fellowship Centre encourages you to work with action plans in their capacity development programs. First, because an action plan helps you plan and implement concrete actions that can improve the performance of your organisation or program. And secondly, because an action plan gives you an opportunity to apply newly acquired knowledge in a concrete context which reinforces the learning. We want to ensure that new knowledge doesn't just remain knowledge, but leads to positive change for both you and your organisation. The action plan can help you move from knowing new things to doing things differently. In the action plan process, you first have to find out what challenges you want to address by the initiative in your action plan and who the involved key stakeholders are. For example, if you have too many road accidents in a given area, you might want to address this issue by finding out why that is to say, what are the main causes, and who the stakeholders involved are. A thorough understanding of the challenges and the stakeholders is a prerequisite to proper planning. Then, having analysed the present situation, you formulate the future desired situation in the form of objectives and the main changes that are needed in order to obtain this situation. We call this the theory or pathway of change. In this phase, you also identify your assumptions about how the desired change shall happen. In the example, the main objective would be to have fewer road accidents, and the analysis might show that the education of drivers, upgrading of the roads and crossings, as well as improved enforcement of traffic laws, would be the main elements of a pathway of change leading to the fulfillment of this objective. Some of the underlying assumptions in this theory of change could be that drivers would actually want to be educated and that they acknowledge that they could drive more carefully. On the basis of the analysis, you can start developing the actual action plan, for instance in the form of a results matrix, stating the desired results at different levels. In this phase, you also identify the risks associated with the successful implementation of the action plan. You will also normally formulate indicators or success criteria that can determine to what degree you have achieved the results. In the example, the annual number of road accidents might be a good indicator of success. Finally, you can specify the detailed activities and make a time schedule and a budget. As some of you may notice, this thinking is based on the same logic that you find in the logical framework approach, in results-based management, and in theory of change approaches, which are different tools or toolboxes widely used by development organizations for design, monitoring, and evaluation of development interventions. You can develop and work with your action plan in many different ways. There is no one way or the way to do it. The following description is a suggestion as to how you can approach the development and implementation of an action plan. First, decide on a focus area where your new knowledge from the learning program can be of benefit to your organization or program. Do this in close dialogue with the key stakeholders in your organization, i.e. colleagues and superiors, and with other important stakeholders. You might consider formulating an initial focus question that indicates the center of gravity of your action plan focus area and frames the planning process. That may be, how can my department improve its monitoring practices? Or, how can we mainstream gender issues into our programs? Then identify the key stakeholders and find out what their interests are with regard to the focus area. Ask yourself the question, what's in it for them? And consider what might make it interesting for them to engage wholeheartedly in the planned actions. Often, some stakeholders will support your initiative, while others might be against it. The three main steps in stakeholder analysis are: first, identifying the stakeholders; second, identifying their interests with regard to the development intervention; and third, making a plan for how to manage and communicate with the key stakeholders. Now, having determined the focus area and identified the key stakeholders, make a problem analysis by identifying the most important challenges that the action plan shall address. For each important challenge, ask yourself, what are the main causes of this problem? Out of the challenges identified, choose a central problem that your action plan will address and construct a problem tree by putting the underlying causes underneath the problems. An example of a problem tree is shown on the next slide. A short video on how to make stakeholder and problem analysis is available in the supplementary course material presented on the front page of the e-learning module. Here is an example of a problem tree. The chosen starter problem is high infant mortality. By asking the question, why do we have a high infant mortality rate? a number of causes are stated. Each time a cause is identified, you repeat the same question. How come we have this problem? And thus the analysis can continue downwards. From the problem analysis, it becomes evident that if you want to address the problem of high infant mortality in a given area, you will have to work with water treatment and nutrition, and probably with other health-related issues too, if our analysis is right. It is a good idea to conduct your problem analysis together with some of the key stakeholders in order to get a more comprehensive picture of the often complex relations between various problems and their causes. Once you have made a proper analysis of the present situation, including current problems and key stakeholders, then it is time to look towards the future desired situation. Here, the purpose is to imagine what an improved future should look like and what results will have been achieved. Walt Disney is said to have formulated the sentence, "If you can dream it, you can do it." From a project management point of view, it's definitely helpful to be able to describe the goal that your development intervention is aiming at. Otherwise, it will become almost impossible to plan. So, in formulating the desired future situation, you typically use a formulation such as this. This and that will have been achieved if and when the action plan has been successfully implemented. The answer to what will have been achieved when the action plan has been successfully implemented will help us formulate the results that we want to see in the form of project objectives. The next step is then to ask yourself, what does it take to produce these results and achieve the project-related objectives? The answer to this question will inform our pathway of change. In this very simplified example, the overall challenge identified is too many road accidents, and the overall objective of the development intervention therefore becomes to achieve a future situation with fewer road accidents. By asking ourselves, how can we reduce the number of road accidents? Part of the answer might be that we need the drivers to drive more carefully. By then asking, how do we get the drivers to drive more carefully? Part of the answer might be to educate the drivers. When you do this kind of exercise, it is a good idea to work with post-its or other movable cardboard cards and to invite the key stakeholders to participate in the process. The best way to achieve results sometimes looks different from different perspectives. A short video on how to develop a pathway of change is available in the supplementary course material presented on the front page of the e-learning module. Change processes are rarely straightforward, and behind your formulation of the ideal pathway of change leading to the results, you will have always made a number of assumptions about what it takes for change to happen. Assumptions are preconditions, things that have to prevail for the change to happen. And remember, assumptions can be wrong. By clarifying the underlying assumptions, you can evaluate how likely a change is to happen and whether you need to initiate other activities or get commitment from key stakeholders in order for the change to happen. Always ask yourself, are my assumptions correct? Are they well founded and tested? And do we all agree on the assumptions? The easiest way to identify assumptions is to ask yourself the question, can I be sure that one change will lead to another? What are the implicit assumptions behind my change logic? And then write down these assumptions so that they can be assessed. Make sure to discuss your assumptions among colleagues and with your partners and beneficiaries. They may have key information that can help prove your assumptions right or wrong, or maybe just add to a more detailed understanding. If we take the example with the drivers we want to train to have fewer road accidents, you can ask yourself, can I be sure that drivers will drive better when they have been trained? And even if drivers drive more responsibly, can I then be sure that there will be fewer traffic accidents? The answers to these questions will help you identify the need for further activities for the change logic to work, and thus reinforce the chances of success of the development intervention. Of how to work with assumptions. Behind each logic, indicated by the vertical grey arrows, there are a number of assumptions, of which we have indicated a few here. Clarifying these assumptions can help you design your intervention in a way that copes with these uncertainties. Assumptions can be identified in various ways. Remember to include key stakeholders in this process. In order to start the process, you could consider asking yourself the following questions. Are we sure that implementing our suggested activities will lead to the desired outputs, and that our activities are the best and most effective way of achieving the desired results? Are we sure that even if our identified activities will support the achievement of the desired result, that they are enough to do so? Are we sure that if our outputs are produced, that they will lead to the expected outcomes? And if our outputs lead to the achievement of the medium-term outcomes, can we then be sure that the long-term impact will actually materialize? Finally, do we have the same assumptions about how change happens between staff and with partners and beneficiaries? The answers to these questions will improve the project planning process. It's important to continuously check your assumptions. On the basis of your reflections and discussions about the causal links in the pathway of change and the underlying assumptions, you can now fill out the first column of the results matrix labeled the intervention logic, as well as the last column with the assumptions underlying this logic. Assumptions should be monitored on a regular basis as circumstances within and outside the action plan context might change. If our assumptions prove to be wrong, we will have to adjust the intervention logic. For instance, even if the trainers are well aware of the trainees' requirements, then, if suddenly the trainers are replaced, this assumption might no longer hold good. There is often some kind of confusion between assumptions and risks, and yes, they can be seen as two sides of the same coin. Assumptions are positive statements that we believe to be true. You assume it to be true, but if it turns out not to be true, there could be a detrimental impact to your project or action plan. Risks are negative statements about what might go wrong, what might hinder the successful transformation of activities into desired results. Whereas assumptions are closely linked to the change or intervention logic, risks are often factors linked to the implementation process. There are two common characteristics of both risks and assumptions. First, there must be some uncertainty to the event. If there is a 100% chance of an event occurring, it is simply a fact. If there is a zero chance of the event occurring, then it's pure fiction. Neither are risks or assumptions. Secondly, assumptions and risks are both outside the total control of the project team, or the team responsible for implementing the action plan. If the event is within the control of the project team, it is neither an assumption nor a risk. Then it should simply be managed to make it happen. Another important aspect of an action plan is the success criteria that we normally formulate in the form of objectively verifiable indicators, or just indicators. The indicators help you agree on how you will measure the degree of success or achievement of the various results on the pathway of change. Indicators can be both quantitative and qualitative. For example, if your objective is to have fewer traffic accidents, then an obvious indicator could be the number of traffic accidents. As many minor traffic accidents are not reported, then the number of traffic deaths might be a more manageable measure. You have to know what the situation was before the development intervention and also have an idea of what the end of intervention target should be. Linked to the indicators are the means of verification, which tell you where to find the data to inform the indicators. If you cannot find reliable means of verification or cannot identify ways of obtaining the required information, you will have to find other indicators. Remember, all indicators you include must be monitored, so be smart in choosing your indicators. There is a difference between things that could be nice to monitor and things that we need to monitor in order to show results. Please also consider how much time and money it will require to monitor each indicator. Once we have identified the relevant indicators and means of verification, we can now finalize the results framework. Remember to ask yourself, how can I monitor a suggested indicator? In the example presented here, it might prove time-consuming and thus expensive to monitor the number of public media debates and the number of critical newspaper articles. If possible, aim for indicators that are already easily available through statistics gathered anyway, if possible. When formulating indicators, you might want to use the SMART principles. SMART is an abbreviation where S stands for specific, that your indicator is explicit and specific to what you want to measure. M for measurable, that the indicator is in fact measurable quantitatively and or qualitatively. Happiness, for instance, is difficult to measure. A stands for agreed, meaning that key stakeholders shall agree that it is the right indicator to use. R stands for realistic and refers to the target of the indicator should be realistic and achievable. And finally, T stands for time-bound, referring to when we expect things to have materialized. There are many different versions of what the SMART abbreviation stands for, and also other acronyms that are also used. It is also a good idea to make indicators genderized so that you can make sure that you have gender segregated information. Finally, formulating indicators also helps us be more specific and agree on what exactly it is that we hope to achieve through our action plan efforts. Finally, once the outline of the development intervention is properly planned and presented in a results matrix, you might ask yourself, what could possibly go wrong when we start to implement the activities? Those are the risks. One obvious category of risk is what happens if the assumptions do not hold good. In that respect, risks and assumptions are very closely related, although we formulate them differently. We assume that something is not a problem. Therefore, assumptions are formulated positively. And we fear that something might go wrong. Therefore, risks are formulated negatively. What is important is not so much whether we call a certain possible event an assumption or a risk, but rather whether we can find a way of making sure that it does not hinder the successful implementation of our development intervention. If you, by adding some supplementary activities, can eliminate or considerably reduce some of the risks, then you will have a more solid project, and then you only state the remaining risks that you will need to monitor during implementation. One way of working with risks is the following. 1. Identify the risks. 2. Prioritize the risks according to seriousness and probability. 3. Suggest mitigating measures to eliminate or reduce the likelihood or seriousness of the risks. A short video on how to formulate assumptions and risks is available in the supplementary course material presented on the front page of the e-learning module. The action plan can have any format, but it is suggested to include the following subjects. First, a description of the context, introduction to the organizational framework, analysis and description of the key stakeholders, and the current challenges that the development intervention shall address. Secondly, a description of the desired future situation in the form of a pathway of change or intervention logic, showing how concrete outcomes from the planned activities will lead to specific short and medium-term outcomes, and how these in turn will contribute to the overall objective or impact that we are aiming at. Thirdly, the identified assumptions underlying the intervention logic shall be presented together with an argumentation as to why you believe that they will hold good. Fourthly, indicators and means of verification shall be presented. They can be inserted and be presented in the form of a results matrix together with the intervention logic and the assumptions, or in any other form. Fifthly, the action plan should contain a specific chapter on the risks and suggested mitigation measures. Sixth, a suggested implementation plan with the main activities, their timing, and an indication of who will be in charge of implementing and delivering them. And finally, a budget corresponding to the planned activities. Remember that activities should only be suggested once the initial analysis of the current situation and the pathway of change showing the desired future situation have been developed and agreed upon by the key stakeholders. Finally, a short reminder of some of the important elements of the Action Planning e-learning module. 1. The action plan is both a process and a product. 2. The action plan is a living document. 3. Monitor assumptions, risks, and results, and use the learning to continuously update and improve the plan. 4. Involve key stakeholders to get ownership and sustainable results. Remember that there are links to further reading as well as 5 short videos on the front page of this e-learning module.